Welcome back, folks. Professor Bannock here with another conception of the self and how we should comport ourselves towards reality on the basis of that understanding of ourselves. Today we're going to talk about Buddhism. Perhaps the central concept of Buddhism is this concept of dukkha, which I have left untranslated here from the Sanskrit, usually translated into suffering. But the English word suffering doesn't quite, to my mind, capture what's really going on with the word dukkha, which is trying to point out something to you about the way all of existence goes. Now, dukkha is usually translated as suffering, and so the truth of dukkha for Buddhists is that all existence involves suffering, involves dukkha. The idea behind dukkha isn't that all life is suffering so much that all existence is somehow unsatisfactory, that it always leaves something open that needs to go on to do the next step. You're never completed, it's never done, it's never working as smoothly as you want it to be. So with dukkha does come the idea of suffering. There's physical suffering when you're in physical pain. There's the suffering of aging as your body stops being able to do what it was able to do before. There's the suffering involved in illness and death. There's also mental suffering, mental illness, anxiety, stress. But dukkha doesn't refer just to pain, it also refers to pleasures. Pleasure is also unsatisfactory. Pleasure is the other side of the coin from pain. The best pleasures are the ones that have the most intense pains on their flip side. And for every pleasure that we receive, we're going to need more. Eventually that pleasure will die off and you'll need once again to go after something else. So even pleasure is unsatisfactory. It's a mark of existence to never settle down into some final state. It's always ongoing and it's never quite satisfactory. That's what dukkha is trying to point you to. There's something a little bit off in the very notion of existing. Some existence is some kind of imbalance. It's as though your shopping cart had a squeaky wheel that won't quite turn correctly. That's the idea behind dukkha. And in a sense, to exist for the Buddhists is to be caught in something from which you seek liberation. That's nirvana. And the concept of nirvana for Buddhism is not some other positive realm that we go to, like a heaven. Rather, it's the extinguishing of the flame of existence. In a sense, for the Buddhists, there's nothing to gain. There's not some carrot hanging out there that eventually you might get to if you just work hard enough. Rather, we're burdened by all of these attachments to things, attachments to people, places, feelings, ideas. And it's in letting go or extinguishing that nirvana comes. So we have nothing to gain but everything to lose. We're burdened by these things that we take to be ourselves, that we take to be giving us peace and happiness. On the Buddhist conception, we go through life, we pick up this idea here, we pick up that person there, we pick up that rigid framework. We hold on to these things thinking that they are us, that they are the means to happiness, and it's in letting go of all these that we find nirvana. Dukkha is somehow baked into the very nature of existence because all phenomena that you can encounter have at least these three features: emptiness, impermanence, and dependent origination. Emptiness is the idea that nothing has its own fixed, permanent nature. There are many different dimensions to the idea of emptiness. One is the ontological dimension, the idea that there is no fundamental structure of reality. If we keep investigating the nature of reality, we'll never arrive at some bottom level where we discover, that's the true nature of things. If we were to keep decomposing reality, we would just get more nothingness back. We would never find the kernel that is the essence of a thing or the essence of the world. Similarly, emptiness refers to the doctrine that our words do not correspond to any mind-independent reality. The idea behind emptiness is not that we're asserting some competing metaphysical conception of reality, but rather that we are using this as a tool to deconstruct all of our fixed ideas about the way reality is. No matter which fixed idea we're using, we're going to be led astray. That fixed idea is going to make us read more into the thing than we can actually observe. if we let ourselves just witness the way things are, then we'll notice that nothing really conforms to our preconceived theories. We have to just let things be as they are rather than trying to make them fit our fixed ideas. Relatedly, impermanence is the idea that there's nothing in this world that's everlasting or eternal. Everything arises and passes away in a process of becoming. Finally, in dependent origination, we notice that nothing stands on its own. Everything is dependent on everything else to arise. For any phenomenon, if we try to seek the conditions under which it arises, we will find that those conditions are so extensive as to make mention of every other phenomenon in an interconnected whole. The idea here is everything is interconnected and interrelated to everything else in such a fundamental way that we couldn't take any one part of reality out and have the rest stand as a whole. Everything's involved in this web of dependent arising and dependent passing away. You can see how that's related to the other doctrines. The world is not composed of things that stand on their own independently and just so happen to come into contact with the other things standing on their own independently. This marker is nothing more than all of the relations it has to everything else. It's just our limited ways of perceiving things that make it seem like here's a specific object independent of all the other objects. Once we can come to perceive reality as it is and stop imposing our fixed ideas, we'll notice that the fixedness or permanence of that seemed to be in the things was really part of our fixed conceptual scheme. And we need to use these Buddhist ideas to break down our usual conceptual schemes and enable us to witness reality as it is. Now, coming to see reality clearly for the Buddhists will have clear implications for ethics and how we should comport ourselves towards reality and the meaning of our lives. Since notice that if we apply those ideas to our own self, we'll find that there really is no self. So the Buddhist doctrine of no self is emptiness, impermanence, and dependent origination applied to the case of the human person. Notice, according to emptiness, you have no fixed nature. You are a process of arising and passing away. You're impermanent. Before you were born, there was no aggregate of things that we could call you. And after you die, there will no longer be any aggregate of things that we could call you. You're impermanent, arising and passing away. Moreover, you're not really the same person now as you were 5 minutes ago. A whole new set of ideas and experiences has come into your bundle of configurations. And you are interdependent with everything else. You don't stand on your own. You arise only because other things have arisen, and your passing away will be conditioned on everything else. So all of this comes together to say there really is no self in any substantial sense. The self is a groundless construct, empty, like all of our other constructs. We seem to experience ourselves as a fixed thing passing through time, relatively unchanged. Of course, we have small changes, but it seems to us that there's a kernel of the self that continues on and maybe even permanent. According to some religious traditions, we have an internal soul that is immortal. Now, the Buddhist asks you to look inside and question, what is the self? What is this that I'm experiencing that seems to be a self? And they'll say you're only going to find an aggregate of things like memories. You remember the way things were for you 10, 5, 2 years ago in a way that you don't remember for other people. You have a set of beliefs that you hold dear to you. Sometimes these beliefs change, but ultimately they seem to be your beliefs. You seem to be in possession of them somehow. You have a particular family lineage that separates you from no one else has exactly the same family lineage as you, except your siblings, and you seem to have the same body. Of course, the body's changing, but it seems to be the same thing. So we're tempted to believe that there is some self, some kernel, some substantive part of reality that ties all of these things together, some substance that has these properties. That's me, these are my memories, these are my beliefs, this is my family lineage, this is my body. Of course, we do experience all of these things. The Buddhists wouldn't deny that, but they say, notice this thing in the center, the substance that is you, is a mere projection. You're doing that, you're believing in this thing, but really it's a construct. In fact, for the Buddhists, what we have is an aggregate of impermanent things, and that's it. There is no essential nature at the center of all this. Once the memories fade, you will no longer be there. Once the body is gone, you will no longer be there. Once the beliefs are gone, you will no longer be there, and so on. Now, at first, this result might seem somewhat scary or perhaps downright horrifying. There is no self. I am not really a fixed thing. I have no soul. I won't survive my own death. But the Buddhists say, actually, this is great news. For at the heart of all needless suffering, all immorality, all injustice, at the heart of all that is the false belief in the self. The projection that we have of ourselves does so much damage because the minute we agree that I have a self, it then becomes rational for me to look out specifically for my own well-being, and wherever that well-being should conflict with the well-being of others, it's rational for me to put my own well-being above theirs. I'm the only one whose self belongs to me, so I need to look out for me. This is the problem of egoism. It's really the trauma of our past self. Why did that happen to me? The fear and anxiety of our future self. What is going to happen to me? All of those things are what cause people to do the things that they do that hurt others and hurt themselves. So oddly enough, the belief that I have a self that I need to protect actually works at cross purposes for my own and others' peace and happiness. By taking such clinging ownership of a self that doesn't really exist, we are led into the illusion and the kinds of ignorance that lead us to immorality and to further suffering. But if there is no self, no special thing that I alone need to protect, then it turns out the dukkha that I experience doesn't belong to me, but it's just part of the general pool of dukkha. I arise and pass away as a certain formation of dukkha, but that's not mine in any robust sense. There's no self to own that dukkha. And if the Buddha is right, then there is no self. Therefore, dukkha or suffering belongs to no one. Once we see that there's no self, egoism, putting myself above others, is totally irrational. If there is no you, then there's no reason, no motivation whatsoever to put any high price on your own well-being or your own suffering, especially at the expense of others. Of course, the flip side of this is, if your suffering is no more important than anyone else's from your own perspective, then clearly it's no less significant either. So this view doesn't justify serving others at the expense of yourself. There is, of course, some practical concern for yourself because you're often in the best position to help yourself. So the ownerless suffering argument doesn't require that we take no note of our own suffering and lump all of our energy trying to reduce suffering onto other people. If I see reality clearly and come to grasp the no-self doctrine fully, I should come to feel great empathy with others because they are not essentially disconnected from me. They are like I am. A stream of mental and physical phenomena arising and passing away. It rather just points out to us that egoism is the result of ignorance. None of us has a substantial self, and we're all pooled in the great circle of dukkha all together. Then there's no other rational comportment towards the world except compassion for the suffering of other people and for ourselves.